They say silence is golden, but in a server room at 2:10 a.m., silence means something's dying. That's what I told myself the night the transaction log flatlined for 3.1 million customers. But let's rewind because corporate disasters don't start with alarms. They start with executives treating agility like it's a personality trait. My name's Evelyn Grant. I'm 55, a senior systems architect at a Boston-based fintech company, longer than some of our engineers have been alive. I don't wear hoodies. I don't toss around buzzwords. And I don't write code to look pretty. I write code to work. I've been with this company since 2001, which in tech years might as well be the Cretaceous period. I built our real-time payment processing platform back when everyone was hoarding bottled water over the Y2K scare. You wouldn't know it to look at me. I've got a modest corner cubicle and no one asks how the system still moves $28 million every single day without collapsing. But whenever an outage threatened and the rookies were shouting rollback, someone always muttered, "Get Evelyn." I was the safety net, the relic, the ghost in the machine. And I liked it that way, until the new CEO decided relics weren't part of the brand. Cue the Next Horizon Workflow Initiative. They gave it a fancy logo and a Microsoft Teams channel, which meant they were serious. Before I go further, if you've stuck around this long, do me a favor, only a tiny fraction of you watching are actually subscribed. If you enjoy hearing war stories from corporate trenches, hit that subscribe button. It means more than you think, and it keeps me digging up these gems from the ruins of HR. Back to the mess. The memo was pure corporate jargon, streamline legacy bottlenecks, cloud-forward frameworks, innovation incubation. Translation: let's hand the CEO's 29-year-old nephew the keys to a codebase like it's a box of Lego bricks. But we didn't know that yet. At first, it was just meetings. Endless meetings. People who'd clearly never debugged anything more complex than a slideshow nodding along to words they didn't understand. Every time I brought up redundancy, someone groaned like I'd just quoted Shakespeare in Latin. My notes ignored. My warnings buried in folders no one opened. Still, I kept working. Quietly. Reliably. Every transaction checkpoint verified, every contingency tested, every obscure vendor clause double-checked. Then one Monday morning, something caught my eye. A new name on the Git repository. Caleb R. No title, no department, no introduction. Just a commit and a bad feeling creeping up my spine. Just a Git push and a bad feeling. The first time I met Caleb Rivers, he was wearing designer sneakers that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and a smirk that said, "I just discovered Stack Overflow." He introduced himself like he was announcing a game show prize. Caleb Rivers, technical consultant / transformation liaison, he said, holding out a hand like he expected confetti to fall from the ceiling. I blinked, pressed the enter key, and replied, "Evelyn, no title, no enthusiasm. Just Evelyn sitting in front of a terminal window full of logic he wouldn't understand, even if it came with emojis and a narrated video tutorial." Turns out, technical consultant was code for CEO's nephew with admin privileges and zero guardrails. He didn't ask where the coffee machine was. He asked why we hadn't microserviced the transactional ingestion layer. I told him that was like trying to turn a freight train into a fleet of scooters mid-delivery. He laughed. Actually laughed. Then said, "Sounds like you're still stuck in a monolith mindset." If I had a nickel for every time some fresh out of boot camp buzzword barista waltzed in and insulted code that had survived 3 corporate mergers and 2 complete cloud migrations, I could retire somewhere sunny with beach Wi-Fi and never touch Jason again. Caleb walked around the office like he owned it, which, to be fair, wasn't far from the truth. When he wasn't name-dropping Kafka or quoting blog posts like scripture, he was calling my team's code crustware. His favorite insult: anything written before COVID crustware, anything without async await crustware, anything with semicolons. You guessed it, crustware. What really made my jaw ache was when he started showing up to our dev stand-ups uninvited. He'd roll his swivel chair in cross-legged like some podcast influencer and toss out questions like, "So why don't we just refactor this and ship it?" Because the compliance platform isn't a side hustle, I wanted to say. Instead, I nodded, took notes, and smiled that quiet, unbothered smile women in tech over 40 have perfected, the one that says, "I survived Flash. I can survive you." Then came the kicker, an email from our director. Evelyn Caleb will be assisting with refactoring your section of the codebase, particularly the transaction logic. My section. The one handling partner balances multi-vendor syncs and fraud detection failsafes. The one I'd refined for 18 years through outages, audits, and one near lawsuit. Now this LinkedIn larva was going to assist. I replied with one word noted. The next week was death by commit. Caleb pushed 5 updates with no peer review, no unit tests, no changelog, just vague comments like cleaned up old junk and streamlined loop. He added a library we didn't need, removed a check that wasn't flashy enough, and refactored a module so aggressively the junior devs had to Google whether it still existed. When I flagged a deletion in the PR thread, a legacy error handler that had saved us in 2016, I asked for his rationale. His reply didn't seem relevant. Looked like dead code. Dead code. That handler was the reason we hadn't had a double withdrawal in 8 years. It was the reason a $1.2 million transaction glitch got fixed in under 4 seconds during the February release cycle. And now it was gone, because the CEO's nephew didn't think it was relevant. I took a long breath, reopened my private backup logs, and started documenting everything, line by line. The one he erased didn't look like much, just a single if statement buried deep in a transaction resolution function, quiet as a church mouse with duct tape over its mouth. But I knew better. That line was the guardian. I'd written it in 2009 after a nasty bug in our vendor sync logic caused an entire batch of transfers to vanish into the void. It had taken 2 grueling weeks, 3 sleep-deprived engineers, and a $190,000 client appeasement payment to fix that mess. That little piece of code was the solution, a conditional failsafe that forced rollback and revalidation before funds could ever post to an external ledger. If you don't want to miss what happens next, and trust me, the next chapter gets even messier, hit that subscribe button now so you're in the room with me when the real fireworks start. Nothing flashy, nothing modern, just reliable, the kind of code that doesn't make for a slick demo but keeps lawsuits off the table. I only noticed it was missing when I ran a dry test on Caleb's latest commit. At first I thought I'd pulled the wrong branch, but no. There it was. My handler gutted like a deer in hunting season. Not deprecated, not commented out, just gone as if it had never existed. I scrolled through his commit notes. Just one line, cleaned up legacy condition. Didn't seem necessary. Didn't seem necessary. I walked over to his desk, calm and professional. I've raised kids. I've weathered outages. I know how to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Caleb," I said evenly. "I saw you removed the failsafe in the transaction resolver. That's not dead code. That's there to prevent partial ledger writes and edge cases, vendor lag race conditions, all of it." He didn't even look up from his energy drink. Just grinned. Oh, that thing looked like something from the Y2K panic. Super crusty. I figured we didn't need it anymore with the new vendor APIs. I blinked. "You figured?" "Yeah," he said, spinning in his chair like he was auditioning for a startup reality show. "If it was important, it would have been in the docs." Right? It was in the docs. The real docs. Not the emoji-filled Confluence pages the new PMs threw together. I'd even linked the internal audit report explaining exactly why that line existed. Caleb hadn't checked the docs. Caleb hadn't checked anything. I nodded, walked back to my desk, and quietly opened my off-network backup. I keep one for every release cycle, not out of paranoia, but because I've seen what happens when people stop being careful. This one was already tagged Q3 pre-Caleb. I cloned it locally and added a bold comment right next to the missing line. Removed failsafe for transaction resolution, flagged for review. That's what I wrote in my local copy before emailing our manager. No rage, no blame, just facts. Subject line, failsafe removal and commit. D45B1. CF concerns. I attached a link to the original audit report, a screenshot of Caleb's deletion, and a reminder that this exact logic had prevented vendor mismatch issues during peak load in 3 different quarters. My recommendation was simple: reinstate the handler or formally review it before live release. Her reply came 3 hours later. Thanks for flagging. Let's keep an eye on it. For now, document and let it go. That was her favorite phrase, let it go. Like we were all Elsa with a GitHub repo. So I let it go. Straight into a time-stamped backup, a printed log, and a flash drive I started carrying in my purse. Not because I knew exactly when it would fail, just that it would. The changes began quietly, almost like whispers. Not the juicy kind you overhear at the coffee machine, but the kind that show up as Slack pings in the middle of the night. Calendar invites I wasn't on. Meetings multiplying like gremlins in the dark. A new internal repo titled Phoenix 2025. I wasn't invited to a single one. Caleb, on the other hand, was everywhere. His face started showing up in team-wide update threads, always seated next to our director in screenshots like he'd just solved world hunger with a JavaScript library. Suddenly, he was leading stand-ups, authoring deployment plans, even getting quoted in the company newsletter Agile Realignment championed by Caleb Rivers Paves, way for faster vendor syncs. Vendor syncs, my domain. The system I'd built. The logic he'd half-gutted like he was speedrunning a legacy purge. When I asked my manager if I should be in the loop, her tone was smooth as lukewarm tea. Evelyn, your work's been invaluable, but Caleb's initiative is part of our modernization track. We don't want to bog it down with legacy perspectives. Too specialized, that's what they call it when they don't want to say too old to listen to anymore. The days blurred into a fog of passive exclusion. I overheard coworkers talking about Friday's deployment in the break room, but that date never appeared on my calendar. I logged into Jenkins to find a new branch with commit names like Refactor, TXN, Path V2, and Remove, Tosh deprecated flags I had personally written. When I pushed for a code review, there was silence. When I opened a ticket questioning missing redundancy layers, I got a smiley face, and working as intended. That kind of isolation doesn't hit all at once. It's slow, like being erased in pencil. I started second-guessing myself. Was I being territorial? Stuck in the past? Then a junior developer from finance pinged me, voice almost apologetic. Hey Evelyn, quick question. Did we change the fallback handler for real-time transfers? I'm getting weird behavior when latency spikes. Send me your logs, I replied. Sure enough, there it was. Transactions hanging instead of rerouting. The failover logic wasn't triggering at all. Who signed off on this? I asked the junior dev. It's part of the Q3 deployment, he replied. Caleb's branch. Q3 was in 10 days. 10 days until every major partner API Visa Stripe Wells would expect millisecond perfect ledgers from our side. 10 days until Caleb's stripped-down, fail-safe-free Frankenstein version of the system was scheduled to go live. And they still hadn't looped me in. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat there, the green glow of my monitor reflecting off a half-empty can of Diet Coke, flipping through commit logs like they were crime scene photos. Every function Caleb had touched, I flagged. Every error I'd caught in staging, I copied. Every concern I'd documented but been ignored on, I printed 16 pages by the end. Neatly stapled, dated, and backed up twice, once on a hard drive in my bottom drawer, and once in a folder labeled When It Happens. Because storms never arrive on time, but you always hear the rumble first. Launch day felt like a funeral wrapped inside a pep rally. Balloons in the break room, muffins, a Slack message from the CEO himself. Too many exclamation points. Excited for today's transformation milestone. Let's show our partners how fast we can move. They'd even branded it Velocity 2.0. God help us. At 9:00 a.m., sharp the boardroom lights dimmed. Caleb stood in front of the massive monitor wearing a blazer he'd probably bought that morning. Product heads, legal teams, and vendor liaisons from across the country joined via video call. He clicked through his slides like some Silicon Valley magician. Big words, glossy diagrams, but not a single mention of risk mitigation. Nothing about rollbacks. Definitely nothing about the removed failsafe. I sat at my cubicle, not invited, not acknowledged, quietly watching the system dashboard in the corner of my screen like I was monitoring a patient on life support. 9:30 a.m. deployment initiated. Jenkins hummed along like a dog wagging its tail right before it bites. New modules pushed. Legacy flags bypassed. Caleb's code spread through the transaction loop like ivy wrapping itself around every process. At first, it looked fine. Dashboard green. First few transactions processed cleanly. In the boardroom, Caleb grinned like he'd just cured cancer with a sticky note. But I was watching the latency spikes. Tiny tremors, 0.2 seconds, then 0.5, then 1.3. I leaned forward, fingers tapping the keyboard, and opened the vendor sync logs. A few of the vendor endpoints weren't responding quickly enough, nothing unusual during heavy load, but something felt off. Instead of retrying the transactions, just sat there. Then the alerts began. Client account number 82754, pending funds not cleared. Please advise. Debit posted but no confirmation on ledger balance. User reporting zero balance after attempted top-up. Urgent. Next came the Slack pings. First a trickle, then a flood. Cars prod issues. 9 new messages. Daughter's vendor escalations. Stripe is calling. Are we throttling them? CADA compliance alerts. Seeing negative balances on 3 test accounts. This was real. I clicked into the heartbeat monitor. Processing times had spiked. Successful ledger syncs were dropping fast. Rollback flags, silent. Because Caleb had deleted the one condition that would have caught this. And now the system didn't know how to fail, so it just kept spinning. Trying. Waiting. Drowning. At 10:02 a.m., the production environment entered what we call gray death. Not a crash, worse, a hang. Users weren't getting errors. They were getting nothing. Just spinning wheels, locked accounts, frozen balances. To them, it looked like their money had vanished. I looked across the floor toward the war room. Through the glass, I could see people pacing. Caleb wasn't smiling anymore. Our director had her hand over her mouth. One vendor rep looked like he might be sick into a trash can. Meanwhile, my own heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the hum of the AC. I knew exactly what was happening, and I knew exactly why. I stood up slowly, walked back to my desk, and took a deep breath. I pulled the printed log of Caleb's commits from my drawer plugged in my backup flash drive and double-checked the timestamp on the deleted line. The same one I'd flagged. The same one I'd warned about. The same one that could have stopped this mess in milliseconds. Coffee in hand, I headed for the war room. Inside, it looked like a tech exorcism. Every screen glowed red. Charts nosedived. Alert dashboards blinked like a Vegas slot machine in full seizure. Phones rang non-stop, internal hotlines, vendor crisis calls. Someone from legal was already on with outside counsel. Someone else was dry heaving into a recycling bin. Caleb stood at the head of the table, gesturing wildly at a wall of code he barely understood, his voice straining for authority. I think what we're dealing with is unexpected legacy recursion clashing with the modernized transaction pathway. Legacy recursion. Caleb said it like it was a slur. I stood just outside the war room, watching through the glass like I was at an aquarium full of drowning fish. In the swirl of digital chaos, my Slack pinged. Chris J. Jr., Dev Evelyn. Didn't you have a guard clause for this? Like, wasn't there a failsafe or something I didn't type back? Instead, I walked slowly, deliberately to my desk. I plugged in my flash drive and opened my archive. The backup I'd made the day Caleb deleted the line came up instantly. I pulled up the commit logs and took a screenshot of his change. Next to it was my comment: removed failsafe for transaction resolution, flagged for review. I copied the full file tree into a PDF highlighting the exact lines in question. Then I grabbed another screenshot, this time of the timestamp, the original audit link, and my email to the manager warning about it. Each piece of evidence landed in the folder like another brick in a wall. Next, I opened Jenkins and captured the deployment log showing Caleb's push and the exact correlation between his commit and the final deployment time. Then I pulled up Confluence and navigated to the old documentation page, the one he'd never read. It was marked Archive Transaction Safety Conditions. Screenshot. Add to folder. Slack pinged again. Chris J. Legal just asked who authored the original ledger loop. I told them it was you. They said you're needed in the war room. I took one last sip of my now lukewarm coffee, printed every page, grabbed my laptop, and walked. When I entered, no one noticed at first. They were too busy trying to patch a severed artery with a Hello Kitty bandage. Executives pointing fingers, engineers sweating through their shirts, compliance shouting over each other like it was the Gotham Super Bowl. I didn't need to yell. I walked to the side table, set down my clipboard, and plugged my laptop into the projector. The room dimmed as my desktop filled the main screen. One click, and there it was, a GitHub commit window. One line in red, deleted. A comment didn't seem necessary. Another click, my email to management dated 3 weeks prior, flagging the removal and outlining the risk. Another click, the PDF, every warning, every timestamp, every receipt. I said nothing. But my calm fury filled every inch of the room. I hadn't knocked. I hadn't paused. I'd walked in like it was my meeting. Clipboard under one arm, laptop in the other, coffee in hand, coffee that had gone from hot to cold to insultingly lukewarm. It matched my mood perfectly: tired, acidic, and fully caffeinated for vengeance. No one tried to stop me. They parted instinctively like a school of nervous fish sensing a much larger predator had just entered the tank. Caleb was mid-blame shuffle. "It's probably just a hiccup with the legacy rollback logic," he said, gesturing vaguely at the screen, something in the old stack rejecting the new post hooks. I flagged this early on. I didn't wait for him to finish. I reached the projector cable, plugged it in without a word, without permission. My laptop screen flooded the wall. First slide, a GitHub commit time-stamped with one red highlighted deletion, the exact line where my failsafe used to be. The condition read, if vendor confirmed rollback transaction log discrepancy. Above it, Caleb's comment, wah, cleaned up, deprecated conditional, seemed unnecessary. Click. My internal email to the manager, subject line, urgent, removal of transaction, fail-safe logic, dated. Attached documentation. Risk outlined in bold. Click. The PDF, 16 pages of receipts, audit logs, flagged warnings, and the before and after comparison that screamed, "This will break." Every single piece ignored. The room went dead silent. You could hear the HVAC system click on. The CTO leaned forward, mouth slightly open, brow furrowed like he'd just spotted the smoking gun in a game of Clue. Legal's face had already shifted. She was mentally drafting the breach disclosure. I stepped forward, set my clipboard on the table, and clicked to the last slide, a side-by-side comparison of working logic versus chaos. Then I said it, one sentence: steady, clear, bulletproof. Here's what was removed, and here's what it did. No drama, no theatrics. Just truth sharpened to a point. Caleb opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out, just air. Maybe it was the sound of his own career collapsing in slow motion. The CTO exhaled through his nose. From the compliance corner came a muttered, "Jesus." At the back of the room, the CEO closed his laptop slowly, deliberately. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, it was over. Not the outage that would take hours to unwind, but Caleb. The room had no blinking cursors, no keyboard clatter. Just the low humming grief of realization settling into every overpaid executive in sight. The CTO leaned back in his chair, the kind of lean that says I'm recalculating my entire week, maybe my entire job. The head of compliance murmured, barely audible, unbelievable. Legal closed her binder with a sound like a gavel hitting wood. And Caleb. Oh, Caleb. He tried to speak. Really tried. The first stutter came out like a bad Wi-Fi signal. I mean, assuming the newer vendor contracts wouldn't. I didn't think no one looked at him. Not one person. He stood there in a $300 hoodie hands, gesturing like he was still recording a startup podcast, but it was over. The energy in the room had shifted completely. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I remained by the projector like a mortician presenting autopsy photos. Calm, present, unshakable. The CEO who'd been silent through every chapter of this disaster, silent when Caleb rewrote the roadmap, silent when half the senior engineers were pushed out, silent through every ignored warning, finally moved. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed his laptop. Softly, deliberately. The click of that latch was louder than any outburst. Still, no one spoke. Caleb reached for his phone, probably to Slack someone in PR to figure out how to erase commit history without leaving a trace. But it didn't matter. He had already committed the one thing you can't roll back: arrogance. I picked up my clipboard, shut off the projector, and started toward the door. As I passed him, he flinched, maybe bracing for a glare or a cutting remark. I gave him neither. I didn't need revenge. I'd just watched a room full of executives see the truth with their own eyes, and the silence that followed was the loudest respect I'd ever heard. Caleb was gone before lunch, not fired, not officially. That would have required admitting fault. But he was reassigned to Strategic Innovation Partnerships, which was corporate hospice. His keycard access was revoked before noon. By 1 p.m., his desk was stripped clean by a silent intern and a cardboard box marked MISC. Someone even peeled his name off the whiteboard as if he'd never existed. No one said goodbye, no Slack farewell thread, no cupcake send-off, just a vacuum where his ego used to sit. Meanwhile, a new calendar invite popped up for me. Subject: Transaction Stack Review, CTO and Engineering Lead, WK, Evelyn. Location: Executive Conference Room. 3 floors above where I normally worked. Of course I went. There was no big show of contrition. No confetti, no apology banners. But they listened. They asked real questions. They took real notes. The CTO opened with walk us through how it was designed to fail without breaking. I smiled, not smugly, just steady, and pulled up the same diagrams I'd built years ago. The boring ones. The ones too dense for Caleb to ever read. The ones that had kept this company solvent for 18 straight years. And I walked them through it like I was giving a guided tour of a fortress, flaws and all, every brick explained. By the end of the session, the whiteboard was packed with action items. My initials were scrawled in the corner of the whiteboard next to 3 new action items. The last one read, New Policy, Legacy Logic Deletion Requires Dual Sign-Off. Underneath, in bold black marker, someone had added one must be from the original architect. And below that, another hand had written Evelyn. I didn't say much. I simply nodded, closed my laptop, and walked out before anyone could clap or stumble through an awkward attempt to thank me for my leadership. I wasn't looking for praise. I just wanted the system to work the way it was supposed to. Later that afternoon, I returned to my desk, the same quiet cubicle they'd somehow forgotten to relocate me from. The hum of the office felt different now, though. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into the chair I'd worn in over years of late nights and 2:00 a.m. maintenance windows. Outside the window framed a parking lot full of leased Teslas and abandoned corporate initiatives. I opened the updated code documentation repository, and there it was. Author Evelyn Grant, original implementation and failsafe design, not tagged as legacy, not marked deprecated, not dismissed as crustware, just mine, exactly as it should be. I took a slow sip of tea. No celebration, no victory lap, no speeches. Just a system that worked again, and for once a room full of executives who now understood why. Somewhere 3 floors up, they were probably still debating the incident, assigning action items, drafting statements for the vendors. But here at my desk, there was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every transaction was safe again. They could call it modernization, transformation, innovation, whatever the corporate branding department wanted. But under the hood, it was still the architecture I'd built, still the guardrails I'd fought to keep in place, still the code that had quietly kept millions of dollars moving without a hitch for nearly 2 decades. And now my name was stamped on it for anyone to see. It wouldn't stop someone else from trying to optimize the wrong thing someday. But now, thanks to that new policy, they'd have to go through me first. And I liked those odds. I leaned back, let the steam from my tea curl upward, and allowed myself one small smile. Because while revenge had never been my goal, vindication was a damn fine consolation prize. I've been through enough boardrooms, late-night outages, and modernization fiascos to know one thing: experience matters. If you were rooting for me in this story, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Share your own war stories, because I promise you there's someone out there who needs to hear them. And here's my advice. Never let anyone convince you that quiet competence is expendable. Protect your work, document everything, and stand your ground when it matters most. Now back me up in the comments, and maybe we'll make sure the next Caleb thinks twice